You replay yesterday's mistakes over and over, while simultaneously worrying about tomorrow's uncertainties. Trapped in a mental prison of your own making, your mind races between regrets about the past and anxieties about the future, stealing your peace and preventing you from experiencing the only moment that truly exists, right now. I am Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who ruled the most powerful empire in history, while maintaining inner peace through the darkest plagues, bloodiest wars, and heaviest burdens of leadership. For decades, I practiced the art of presentment living while bearing the weight of millions of lives, discovering that true power comes not from controlling external circumstances, but from mastering your own mind in each passing moment. The Stoic principles I'll share will transform your relationship with time itself, giving you the tools to break free from mental time travel and find profound peace in the present. Whether you're governing an empire or managing your daily responsibilities, the same techniques that sustained me through history's greatest challenges can anchor you firmly in the here and now. But first, like this video, subscribe for more Stoic wisdom, and comment where you're watching from. I want to see how far the need for presentment mastery has spread across our modern world. I was not born to be emperor. When the first was 17, Emperor Antoninus Pius adopted me not because I sought power, but because he saw in me the discipline to bear its weight. I had spent my youth studying philosophy, believing I would live a life of quiet contemplation, but fate had different plans. And when I ascended to the throne in 161 AD, I discovered that leadership demands something philosophy books cannot teach: the ability to live fully in each moment, no matter how unbearable that moment might be. The Antonine Plague struck during the early years of my reign, a devastating disease that would eventually claim the lives of 5 million people across my empire. Each morning, I would wake to reports of death tolls that staggered the mind. Entire legions were decimated. Cities became graveyards. My advisors would present me with scrolls bearing numbers that represented not statistics, but fathers, mothers, children, human beings whose lives had been cut short while I slept. In those dark hours, I learned the brutal truth about time that most people never face. The past cannot be changed, no matter how much we replay it, and the future cannot be controlled, no matter how much we worry about it. When you hold the lives of millions in your hands, you cannot afford the luxury of mental time travel. Every decision must be made now, with the information available now, for the people suffering now. I remember one particular morning when the plague reports were especially devastating. My natural instinct was to retreat into my mind, to replay the decisions I had made weeks earlier, wondering if I could have acted differently. But as I sat in my private chambers, I realized that every moment I spent reliving the past was a moment stolen from the people who needed my full attention. In the present, that morning, I began what would become my daily practice of present moment meditation. I would sit quietly before dawn, anchoring my attention in my breath, in the sensations of my body, in the immediate reality of where I was and what I could actually control. This wasn't an escape from responsibility, was preparation to meet responsibility with full presence. The practice transformed not just my ability to lead, but my understanding of what leadership actually means. I discovered that true power comes not from the ability to control external circumstances, but from the capacity to respond to whatever arises with complete presence and clarity. When your mind is scattered between regrets about yesterday and anxieties about tomorrow, you cannot see clearly what needs to be done today. Through those plague years, I learned to find stillness in the center of chaos, not by avoiding the reality of suffering, but by meeting it fully in each moment. This is when I truly understood that the present moment is not just where life happens, is the only place where we have any real power at all. ***, before I learned to live in the present. I was a prisoner of my own mind, and I didn't even realize I was locked in a cell. Each day, I would spend countless hours replaying conversations with senators, second-guessing military decisions, and rehearsing future scenarios that might never come to pass. I thought this mental activity was useful, that by constantly reviewing the past and planning for the future, I was being a responsible leader. But I was wrong. The human mind, I discovered, is naturally drawn to everywhere except where we actually are. It's as if we believe that happiness, peace, and solutions exist in some other time, either in a past we wish we could change, or a future we hope will be better. But this is a cruel illusion that steals our life from us, one moment at a time. I observed this pattern not just in myself, but in everyone around me. My advisors would become paralyzed by past failures, unable to make clear decisions in the present because they were haunted by what had gone wrong before. My generals would become so anxious about future battles that they couldn't focus on the current campaign. Citizens throughout the empire seemed to live in a constant state of either nostalgia or worry, rarely experiencing the life that was actually unfolding before them. What I came to understand is that both past and future are mental constructs, exist only in our thoughts. The past is gone and cannot be changed, no matter how many times we replay it in our minds. The future has not yet arrived and may never unfold as we imagine, regardless of how much energy we spend worrying about it. Yet we give these mental phantoms the power to steal our peace and cloud our judgment. During the early months of my reign, I would lie awake at night, replaying a difficult conversation with a rebellious senator, analyzing every word I had spoken, imagining better responses I could have given. This mental rehearsal felt important, as if by perfecting the past in my mind, I could somehow change what had happened. But all it accomplished was robbing me of sleep and leaving me exhausted for the challenges of the next day. I also noticed how future-focused anxiety created a different kind of prison. When reports came of Germanic tribes gathering near our borders, I would spend hours imagining every possible invasion scenario, trying to mentally solve problems that hadn't yet materialized. This wasn't strategic planning. It was anxious projection that left me tired and unfocused when real decisions needed to be made. The breakthrough came when I realized that the mind's obsession with past and future is actually a form of resistance to reality. We escape to other times because the present moment sometimes feels too intense, too uncertain, or too demanding. But this escape is always temporary, and when we return, as we always must, the present moment is still waiting for us, often more complicated because we've been absent from it. True power, I learned, lies in the willingness to be fully present to what is happening now, whether that moment is pleasant or painful, certain or uncertain, easy or difficult. The present moment is the only place where we can actually think clearly, make decisions, take action, and experience peace. Everything else is just mental time travel that weakens our capacity to live skillfully in the only time that actually exists. Each dawn, before the palace stirred to life, before the endless stream of advisors and petitioners began demanding my attention, I would create a sacred space of silence in my private chambers. This became the most important hour of my day, not because it was peaceful, but because it prepared me to meet whatever chaos awaited with complete presence. I would begin by sitting quietly, often on a simple wooden stool rather than the ornate imperial chair that dominated my public appearances. The luxury of the palace meant nothing in these moments. What mattered was returning my scattered attention to the simple reality of being alive in this particular moment. I would close my eyes and focus on my breath, feeling the air enter and leave my body, anchoring myself in the most basic and immediate experience available to any living being. But this wasn't passive meditation. I had developed a series of questions that I would pose to myself each morning, questions designed to cut through the mental fog of yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties. The first question was always, what is actually happening right now? Not what I wished was happening, not what I feared might happen, but what was genuinely present in this moment. Often, the answer was surprisingly simple. I was breathing. I was alive. I was seated in a room with morning light filtering through the windows. When I brought my attention to what was actually occurring, rather than what my mind was telling me about what was occurring, I often discovered that the present moment was far more peaceful than my thoughts about it. The second question I would ask myself was, what can I actually control in this moment? This question became essential because the weight of empire creates the illusion that you should be able to control everything. But true power comes from distinguishing clearly between what lies within your influence and what does not. I could control my attention, my responses, my character, and my actions. I could not control other people's decisions, natural disasters, or the outcomes of battles once they had begun. My third morning question was, what does virtue require of me today? This wasn't about grand gestures or heroic acts. Most often, virtue required simple presence, listening fully to advisors, responding thoughtfully rather than reactively, making decisions based on wisdom rather than fear or anger. But I could only access this virtue by staying grounded in the present moment, because virtue is always expressed in the now, never in mental reconstructions of the past or fantasies about the future. The transformation that came from this daily practice was profound. Before I began these morning reflections, I would often feel overwhelmed before the day even began, my mind already racing through dozens of potential challenges and scenarios. After establishing this routine, I found that I could meet each situation as it actually arose, rather than as I had imagined it might arise. I remember one particular morning when reports had arrived the night before of a serious revolt in Gaul. My old pattern would have been to spend the entire night and following morning mentally rehearsing every possible response, working myself into a state of exhaustion before I even had complete information. Instead, I used my morning practice to anchor myself in what I actually knew and what I could actually do in that moment. The clarity that came from this grounded approach allowed me to make much better decisions when my advisors presented me with the real facts and options. This daily practice taught me that presence is not a luxury for peaceful moments. It's an essential tool for navigating life's most challenging demands. The most powerful skill I developed as emperor was learning to see events exactly as they are, rather than through the distorting lens of my fears, desires, and assumptions. I call this the discipline of perception, and it became the foundation of all my other present moment practices. Without clear seeing, we cannot respond skillfully to what life presents us. Early in my reign, when a senator would openly criticize one of my policies, my immediate perception was often, this man is attacking me personally and undermining my authority. This interpretation would trigger anger, defensiveness, and a desire for retaliation. But I learned to pause and ask myself, what is actually happening here? The fact was simply this: a senator was expressing disagreement with a policy. Everything else, the personal attack, the threat to my authority, was my interpretation, not reality. This distinction between facts and interpretations became crucial for effective leadership. Facts are what any objective observer would notice. A person spoke certain words, a letter arrived with specific content, a battle resulted in particular casualties. Interpretations are the stories we tell ourselves about what these facts mean, and these stories are often colored by our past experiences, future fears, and emotional states. I developed a practice of separating these layers. Whenever something triggered a strong emotional response, during the Germanic campaigns, when scouts would report enemy troop movements, my initial perception might be, we are about to be overwhelmed by superior forces. But when I applied the discipline of perception, the facts were much simpler. Enemy troops had been observed in certain locations. The interpretation that we would be overwhelmed was my projection, based on uncertainty and concern for my soldiers' lives. This clarity allowed me to make decisions based on reality rather than on my emotional reactions to reality. When I saw the situation clearly, I could assess our actual tactical options, consider the real strengths and weaknesses of both forces, and develop strategies based on what was true rather than what I feared might be true. The discipline extends beyond military and political situations to the most mundane moments of daily life. When a servant would spill wine during a meal, my automatic perception might be, this person is careless and disrespectful. But the fact was simply that wine had been spilled. The carelessness and disrespect existed only in my interpretation. This person might have been tired, distracted by worry about a sick family member, or simply experiencing the kind of small accident that happens to everyone. I found that most of our suffering comes not from what happens to us, but from our interpretations of what happens to us. A rainstorm that ruins outdoor plans is just whether our suffering comes from the story we tell ourselves about how this rain is inconvenient, unfair, or catastrophic. A critical comment from a colleague is just words. Our pain comes from interpreting those words as a personal attack or a sign that we are failures. This discipline of perception requires constant vigilance because the mind's habit of adding interpretive layers to raw experience is both automatic and persistent. But with practice, I learned to catch myself in the act of interpretation and return to what was simply and obviously true. This return to clarity always brought me back to the present moment, because facts exist in the now while interpretations usually involve projections about the past or future. The freedom that comes from clear perception is extraordinary. When you see what is actually happening rather than what you think is happening, you can respond with wisdom rather than react from confusion. You can address real problems rather than fighting with imaginary ones. You can find peace in the present moment because you are no longer being terrorized by stories that exist only in your own mind. This practice transformed how I governed, how I related to others, and how I experienced my own life. Reality, I discovered, is much kinder than our interpretations of reality, and it is always available to us in the present moment. Throughout my reign, I was surrounded by the most formidable fortifications in the ancient world. Roman engineering had created walls, towers, and defensive systems that could withstand any siege. But I learned that the most important fortress is not made of stone, and more to it is the inner citadel of the mind, built from awareness and unshakable internal sovereignty. This inner citadel is a place within yourself that external circumstances cannot touch. It is not built through denial or escape from reality, but through such complete acceptance of the present moment that nothing can disturb your fundamental peace. When you establish this inner fortress, you can maintain calm in the center of any storm, not because the storm isn't real, but because you have found something deeper than the storm. I first discovered the need for this inner strength during a particularly brutal winter campaign against the Germanic tribes. We had been fighting for months in conditions that tested every limit of human endurance. The cold was so severe that men would lose fingers to frostbite. Food supplies were running dangerously low. Disease was spreading through the camps. My soldiers looked to me for confidence and direction, but I felt the same fear and uncertainty they did. One night, as I sat in my tent, listening to the wind howl across the frozen landscape, I realized that my outer circumstances would continue to change, sometimes favorable, sometimes terrible, but my ability to respond wisely to whatever arose could remain constant. This capacity for wise response was my inner citadel, and unlike my external situation, it was completely under my control. The foundation of this inner fortress is the recognition that you always have sovereignty over your own mind, regardless of what is happening around you. Others can imprison your body, destroy your possessions, or threaten your life, but they cannot force you to abandon your principles, lose your dignity, or surrender your peace unless you choose to let them. This choice happens in the present moment, and it happens again in each new present moment. Building this inner citadel requires daily practice. Every time you choose to respond rather than react, you strengthen its walls. Every time you refuse to be pulled into mental time travel by regret or anxiety, you deepen its foundations. Every time you accept what is actually happening instead of fighting against reality, you expand its protective capacity. I remember a day when news arrived that a trusted advisor had been spreading rumors designed to undermine my authority. My initial reaction was anger and a desire for immediate retaliation, but I retreated to my inner citadel, that space of present moment awareness where I could observe my emotions without being controlled by them. From this place of inner stability, I could see that my advisor's actions revealed his own insecurity and fear, not some fundamental threat to my leadership. This perspective allowed me to respond with wisdom rather than revenge. I arranged a private conversation where I could address his concerns directly and honestly, without the public humiliation that my anger had initially demanded. The result was not only a preserved relationship, but also a deeper understanding of the pressures he had been facing. None of this would have been possible if I had reacted from my initial emotional impulse rather than responding from my inner citadel. The inner citadel is not a place of withdrawal from life, it is the secure base from which you can engage life more fully when you know that your fundamental well-being does not depend on external circumstances. You can take risks, face challenges, and love others without the desperate need to control outcomes. You can be present to whatever arises because you are no longer threatened by what might arise. This inner fortress is always under construction. Each present moment offers another opportunity to strengthen it by choosing awareness over reactivity, acceptance over resistance, and wisdom over impulse. The more you practice residing in this inner citadel, the more you discover that it is not just a refuge from the storms of life, it is the place from which you can navigate those storms with skill, courage, and grace. Each morning, I would remind myself that this day might be my last, and each evening I would reflect on the day as if it were complete. This was not morbid obsession, but the most practical wisdom I ever discovered. Death, when properly understood, is the greatest teacher of present moment, living because it strips away everything that is not essential and reveals what truly matters. During my reign, death was not an abstract concept, but a daily reality. The Antonine Plague claimed the lives of close friends, trusted advisors, and beloved family members. Military campaigns took soldiers I had grown to respect and care for. The constant presence of mortality taught me something that no philosophy book could convey, that life is precious precisely because it is temporary, and therefore every moment deserves our full attention. I began wearing a simple ring engraved with symbols that reminded me of life's brevity, not to cultivate fear, but to cultivate appreciation. When I would catch my mind wandering into petty concerns about social slights or political maneuvering, I would touch this ring and ask myself, will this matter when I am dying? Almost always, the answer was no, and this perspective would immediately return me to what was genuinely important in that moment. The contemplation of death has a remarkable effect on the mind's tendency to escape into past and future. When you truly accept that your time is limited and uncertain, you become much less willing to waste the present moment on regret or worry. Every minute spent replaying old conversations or rehearsing future scenarios is a minute you will never have again. This realization makes present moment awareness not just a philosophical ideal, but an urgent practical necessity. I lost my adoptive father Antoninus Pius during my early years as emperor, and his death taught me something profound about the relationship between mortality and presence. In his final weeks, when we both knew his time was short, our conversations became incredibly present and meaningful. We stopped discussing political strategies or future plans and instead spoke about what we appreciated about each other, what we had learned from our time together, and how we had grown through our relationship. These conversations were some of the most real and connected exchanges of my life. This experience showed me that death awareness doesn't diminish life, it concentrates it. When we remember that everything is temporary, we pay attention differently. The sunset becomes more beautiful because we know there will only be a finite number of sunsets we will witness. Conversations with loved ones become more precious because we understand that every interaction might be our last. Even difficult moments gain a certain poignancy when we remember that we will someday miss even the struggles we are currently experiencing. I developed a practice of imagining my own death, not with fear, but with curiosity about what would remain. What aspects of my life would I remember with satisfaction? What would I regret not having done or said? What kind of person would I want to have been when I took my final breath? These questions invariably brought me back to the present moment, because the answers could only be lived now. The awareness of mortality also revealed the absurdity of many things I had previously considered important. Status competitions, accumulation of possessions, holding grudges, all of these seemed ridiculous when viewed from the perspective of someone who might die at any moment. This didn't make me careless or nihilistic. Instead, it helped me focus my energy on what would truly matter in the end: how I treated others, the character I developed, the wisdom I gained, and the love I shared. Death is the ultimate present moment teacher, because it reminds us that the present moment is all we ever actually have. The past is gone forever, the future may never come, but this breath, this heartbeat, this moment of consciousness is absolutely real and completely available. When we truly understand this, we stop postponing life, stop saving our attention for some future moment when conditions are perfect, and start living fully in the only time that exists, straight now. Asterisk, asterisk, the most radical teaching I can share with you is this: learn to want what happens. This doesn't mean becoming passive or abandoning your efforts to improve situations. It means developing the capacity to fully accept whatever the present moment contains, while still working skillfully to create positive change. This discipline of desire transformed my relationship with reality and became the source of unshakable peace. When I first ascended to the throne, I carried an endless list of how I thought things should be. The empire should run more efficiently. The Senate should be more cooperative. My generals should execute strategies flawlessly. Citizens should be more virtuous. This constant comparison between reality and my preferences created continuous suffering, because reality rarely matched my expectations. The breakthrough came during a particularly difficult period, when Germanic tribes had crossed the Danube and were threatening several provincial cities. My initial desire was for this crisis not to be happening. I wanted peaceful borders. I wanted my soldiers safe in their barracks. I wanted to focus on domestic improvements rather than warfare. But my wanting things to be different didn't change what was actually occurring. It only added the suffering of resistance to the challenge of responding skillfully to the invasion. I learned to distinguish between two different types of desires: preferences and attachments. A preference is a gentle inclination toward one outcome over another, held lightly enough that you can work toward it without being disturbed if it doesn't manifest. An attachment is a rigid demand that reality conform to your will, combined with emotional suffering when it doesn't. Preferences leave you free to respond wisely to whatever happens. Attachments make you a prisoner of circumstances beyond your control. During the plague years, I watched this distinction play out dramatically in how different people responded to loss. Those who held their loved ones with preference them deeply while accepting the possibility of loss could grieve fully when death came, while still finding meaning and connection in their remaining relationships. Those who held attachments, demanding that their loved ones never die or suffer often, became bitter, isolated, and unable to appreciate the life that remained available to them. I began practicing what I called wanting what is as a daily spiritual exercise. When it rained during outdoor ceremonies, instead of resenting the weather, I would find something to appreciate about the rain, how it nourished the earth, how it created a different kind of beauty, how it tested our adaptability. When senators disagreed with my proposals, instead of being frustrated by their opposition, I would look for the wisdom in their concerns or the opportunity their resistance created for me to explain my reasoning more clearly. This practice didn't make me passive or indifferent. I still worked energetically to solve problems, protect the empire, and serve my people. But I did this work from a place of acceptance rather than resistance, which made me far more effective. When you're not fighting against what is happening, you can use all your energy to respond skillfully to what is happening. I remember a winter when supply lines to our northern legions were disrupted by severe storms, leaving thousands of soldiers without adequate food and warm clothing. My first impulse was to rage against the weather, the failed planning, and the unfairness of the situation. But I quickly recognized that this resistance was useless energy expenditure. Instead, I channeled that same energy into creative problem solving, organizing emergency supply runs, redistributing resources from better supplied units, and personally visiting the affected camps to boost morale. The discipline of desire also applies to our internal experiences. Instead of wanting to feel different than you feel, learn to accept your emotions as they arise while choosing your responses consciously. When I felt afraid before battles, I stopped trying to eliminate the fear and instead welcomed it as information about the seriousness of the situation. When I felt angry at political opponents, I used that anger as energy for more passionate advocacy of my position, rather than letting it drive me toward personal attacks or revenge. This acceptance of what is happening in the present moment doesn't mean you stop having preferences or cease working for positive change. It means you stop adding the extra layer of suffering that comes from demanding that reality be different than it is. When you align your desires with what is actually occurring, you find peace in every moment, regardless of whether that moment contains pleasure or pain, success or failure, ease or challenge. The ultimate freedom comes when you realize that your happiness doesn't depend on getting what you want, but on wanting what you get. This shift in perspective transforms every experience into an opportunity for growth, learning, and awakening, because you are no longer at war with your own life. Asterisk, asterisk. The most crucial decisions of my reign were made not in comfortable deliberation rooms, but in moments of immediate crisis when there was no time for extended analysis or consultation with advisors. These high-pressure situations taught me that clear decision-making requires complete presence, free from the ghosts of past failures and the anxieties of future consequences. During the Battle of Carnuntum, Germanic forces had surrounded our position and were preparing for what appeared to be a final assault. My generals presented me with three options: attempt a desperate breakout that would likely result in massive casualties, surrender and hope for negotiated terms, or hold our position and fight to the last man. Each choice carried enormous risks, and the lives of thousands of soldiers hung in the balance. In that moment, I discovered something profound about decision-making under pressure. The clarity you need comes not from trying to predict all possible outcomes, but from being completely present to the current situation and trusting your cultivated wisdom to guide you. When I stopped trying to mentally simulate every possible future scenario and instead focused fully on what I actually knew about our tactical position, enemy capabilities, and my soldiers' morale, the right choice became clear. I chose a fourth option that none of us had initially considered, a tactical withdrawal under cover of darkness to more defensible terrain, followed by a coordinated counterattack at dawn. This decision didn't come from elaborate strategic analysis, but from present moment intuition based on years of experience. Because I wasn't distracted by fear of failure or attachment to any particular outcome, I could access the wisdom that was already within me. This experience taught me that past-focused decision-making is paralyzed decision-making. When you're replaying previous failures, questioning past choices, or trying to avoid repeating old mistakes, you cannot see clearly what the current situation actually requires. The past provides valuable learning, but it should inform your present moment awareness, not dominate it. Future-focused decision-making is equally problematic. When you're primarily concerned with controlling outcomes, avoiding potential problems, or ensuring that your choice will be vindicated by history, you become risk-averse in ways that often guarantee the very failures you're trying to avoid. The future consequences of your decisions matter, but they should be considered within present moment wisdom, not as the primary driver of your choices. I developed a practice for important decisions that I called counsel with the present moment. Before making any significant choice, I would pause and bring my full attention to what was actually happening right now. What information was available, what values were at stake, what felt aligned with my deepest principles, what would serve the highest good of everyone involved. These questions could only be answered from a place of complete presence. One of the most difficult decisions I faced was whether to continue military campaigns against Germanic tribes or negotiate a peace treaty that would require significant territorial concessions. The pressure from various factions was enormous. Some demanded total victory. Others pushed for immediate peace, regardless of terms. If I focused on past military failures, I would lean toward capitulation. If I focused on future glory, I would choose continued warfare regardless of cost. But when I brought my attention fully to the present moment, the current state of our forces, the actual threat level, the real needs of our people, the genuine possibilities for lasting peace, a middle path became visible. We could negotiate from a position of strength while remaining open to honorable terms, pursuing peace without appearing weak and maintaining military readiness without unnecessary aggression. The key insight is that every decision point is a present moment opportunity to align your actions with your deepest wisdom and values. When you're fully present, you have access to all the learning from your past without being trapped by it, and you can consider future implications without being paralyzed by them. Present moment decision-making is not impulsive or reactive. The most thoughtful approach possible because it draws from your complete awareness without the distortions of temporal preoccupation. Also learned that hesitation and delay often come from mental time travel. When you can't decide, it's usually because part of your mind is in the past worrying about previous mistakes, and part is in the future trying to guarantee a perfect outcome. When you bring all of your attention to the present moment, decisions often become clear, not because they're easy, but because you can finally see what the situation actually requires. The most powerful decisions of my life came from this place of present moment clarity, not because I could predict their outcomes, but because I could trust that acting from complete presence and aligned principles would lead to results I could live with, regardless of how they unfolded. Every action, no matter how small, is an opportunity to practice present moment awareness. The way you hold a pen, speak to a servant, or walk through a room can either reinforce scattered, automatic behavior or cultivate the focused presence that transforms ordinary activities into spiritual practice. I learned that the quality of attention you bring to each action determines not only its effectiveness, but also its ability to deepen your capacity for conscious living. During my early years as emperor, I would often find myself rushing through daily tasks while my mind raced ahead to more important matters. I would sign documents while thinking about upcoming meetings, eat meals while mentally rehearsing speeches, and even conduct conversations while part of my attention was planning future strategies. This divided attention meant that I was never fully present to any activity, which made all of them less effective and less satisfying. The transformation began when I started treating every action as worthy of complete attention. When I was writing correspondence, I would focus entirely on the words I was choosing, the clarity of my communication, and the person who would receive the message. When I was walking through the palace corridors, I would feel my feet touching the ground, notice the light falling through windows, and observe the life happening around me. These simple shifts in attention revolutionized both my effectiveness and my sense of aliveness. I discovered that present moment action has a quality of effortlessness that distracted action lacks. When you're fully engaged with what you're doing, without mental commentary about whether you'd rather be doing something else or anxiety about what comes next, you can access a natural flow state where action becomes almost automatic. Your hands know how to write. Your voice knows how to speak with authority. Your mind knows how to analyze problems. But these capacities are diminished when you're not fully present to engage them. One of my most vivid memories of this principle in action came during a particularly complex negotiation with Parthian ambassadors. Previous diplomatic sessions had been frustrating because I would often find myself thinking ahead to my responses while they were still speaking, or replaying something they had said earlier while missing what they were saying now. For this crucial meeting, I committed to bringing my complete attention to each moment of the conversation. The difference was remarkable. When I listened with total presence, I could hear not just their words, but the underlying concerns and motivations that their formal diplomatic language was designed to conceal. When I spoke, my responses arose from genuine understanding rather than prepared talking points. The negotiation that I had expected to take days was resolved in a single afternoon, with terms that satisfied both parties because we had been able to communicate authentically. This discipline of action extends to the most mundane activities. I began eating meals with complete attention to the taste, texture, and nourishment of food, rather than using meal times for informal meetings or mental planning. The food became more satisfying, my digestion improved, and these breaks in my schedule became restorative rather than just necessary interruptions. I applied the same principle to physical exercise and military training. Instead of using these activities as opportunities to think about other things, I would focus completely on the movement of my body, the challenge of the exercises, and the development of strength and coordination. This not only made the training more effective, but also provided regular practice in the kind of focused attention that served me well in all other activities. The practice of present moment action also revealed how much energy is wasted through internal resistance to what we're doing. When part of your mind is arguing with your current activity, wishing you were somewhere else, resenting the necessity of the task, or rushing to get it over with, you create internal friction that makes everything more difficult and tiring. When you fully commit your attention to whatever you're doing, that resistance dissolves and you can work with much greater ease and efficiency. I noticed this particularly during the administrative aspects of leadership that I found less inspiring than military strategy or philosophical discussion. When I would approach these tasks with resentment or impatience, they would drag on endlessly and leave me exhausted. When I brought the same quality of attention to administrative work that I brought to activities I enjoyed more, Even bureaucratic tasks became engaging and were completed much more quickly. The ultimate insight is that there are no unimportant actions when you're practicing present moment awareness. Each movement, each word, each choice is an opportunity to strengthen your capacity for conscious living. The emperor who signs a routine proclamation with complete attention is developing the same skill. He will need to make life and death decisions. In crisis situations, nothing tests your present moment awareness like dealing with people who challenge your patience, question your authority, or seem determined to create conflict. As emperor, I was constantly surrounded by individuals whose personal agendas, fears, and insecurities manifested as difficult behavior directed toward me and others. Learning to respond rather than react to these challenges became one of my most valuable leadership skills and spiritual practices. Senator Cassius Dio was notorious for his long-winded speeches that seemed designed more to showcase his rhetorical skills than to advance any meaningful legislation. During Senate sessions, he would often speak for hours, raising obscure procedural objections and revisiting decisions that had already been settled. My initial response was irritation and impatience. I would find myself mentally composing cutting remarks or planning ways to limit his speaking time. But I realized that my emotional reactions to Cassius were stealing my attention from the present moment and making me a less effective leader. Instead of letting my mind create stories about his motivations or rehearse future confrontations, I began practicing what I called present moment patience. When he would launch into one of his elaborate speeches, I would use the time to practice complete presence listening, not just to his words, but observing my own internal responses without being controlled by them. This shift in approach revealed something unexpected. Underneath his verbose presentation style, Cassius often raised legitimate concerns that deserved consideration. When I stopped being distracted by irritation at his delivery, I could evaluate the substance of his points more fairly. On several occasions, his detailed objections actually helped us identify real problems with proposed legislation that we might have overlooked otherwise. More importantly, my calm, present moment responses to his challenges began to transform our interactions. Instead of the power struggles that had characterized our previous exchanges, we developed a working relationship based on mutual respect. He continued to be thorough and detailed in his approach, but he began focusing his efforts more constructively because he wasn't getting the defensive reactions he had previously provoked. I applied this same principle with my military commanders, who sometimes questioned my strategic decisions. General Marcus Pontius had a habit of challenging orders in front of other officers, which initially seemed like insubordination that demanded immediate correction. But when I responded from present moment awareness rather than wounded authority, I discovered that his challenges often came from genuine concern for his soldiers' welfare and valuable tactical insights I hadn't considered. Instead of shutting down his input, I began creating private opportunities for him to express his concerns before orders were finalized. This not only improved our military strategies, but also strengthened his loyalty, because he felt heard and valued rather than simply commanded. What had appeared to be difficult behavior was actually passionate commitment expressing itself awkwardly. The key insight is that difficult people are usually not fundamentally bad people. They are people whose needs, fears, or pain are manifesting in ways that create challenge for others. When you respond to the underlying human reality rather than just the surface behavior, you often discover possibilities for connection and resolution that weren't visible when you were reacting defensively. This doesn't mean accepting abusive behavior or abandoning appropriate boundaries. When Senator Lucius began spreading malicious rumors about my family, I addressed the situation directly and firmly, but I did so from a place of present moment, clarity about what behavior was unacceptable, rather than from personal anger or a desire for revenge. The correction was more effective because it was based on principles rather than emotions. I developed a practice of pausing before responding to any challenging behavior, taking a breath and asking myself, what does this situation actually require? Sometimes it required setting clear boundaries, sometimes offering compassion for someone who was struggling, sometimes simply maintaining my own equilibrium without trying to change the other person at all. The practice of present moment patience also taught me to distinguish between people who were genuinely difficult and situations where I was being triggered by my own unresolved issues. When someone reminded me of past conflicts or activated my insecurities, I would sometimes perceive their behavior as more problematic than it actually was. Present moment awareness helped me see these projections more clearly and respond to what was actually happening rather than what my past experiences were making me fear might happen. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that how I responded to difficult people was always a choice, and that choice could either reinforce patterns of conflict and reactivity or create opportunities for greater understanding and more skillful solutions. Every challenging interaction became a chance to strengthen my capacity for conscious response rather than unconscious reaction, which served me well in all areas of leadership and life. Throughout my life, I suffered from chronic stomach ailments that caused me considerable physical discomfort, particularly during times of stress. Rather than viewing this pain as an obstacle to overcome or an enemy to defeat, I learned to use bodily discomfort as one of my most effective teachers in the art of present moment living. Pain, I discovered, has a unique ability to anchor you in immediate reality and strip away the mental elaborations that usually distract us from what is actually happening. The stomach pains would often intensify during military campaigns, probably worsened by irregular eating, travel stress, and the constant pressure of command decisions. My initial approach was to fight against the discomfort, using various remedies and treatments while mentally resisting the experience. I would find myself thinking, this shouldn't be happening, I can't afford to be weak right now, or if only this pain would go away, then I could focus properly. But this resistance to pain created a second layer of suffering on top of the physical discomfort. The pain itself was just sensation and pleasant, yes, but manageable. The real suffering came from my mental commentary about the pain, my fears about what it might mean, and my resentment that it was interfering with my responsibilities. When I learned to separate these two layers, the entire experience became much more workable. I began experimenting with bringing complete present moment attention to physical discomfort instead of trying to escape from it. When the stomach pains would arise during important meetings, instead of fighting the sensation or letting it distract me from what others were saying, I would acknowledge it fully while continuing to engage with the business at hand. This required a kind of dual awareness, fully present to both the physical sensation and the external situation. What I discovered was remarkable. When you stop adding mental resistance to physical pain, the pain itself often becomes less intense, and certainly less disruptive. The sensation remains, but it no longer dominates your entire experience. You can have pain and still think clearly, make good decisions, and remain emotionally balanced. The pain becomes just one element of your present moment experience, rather than something that hijacks your entire attention. During one particularly severe episode that occurred while I was reviewing battle plans with my generals, I decided to use the pain as an anchor for present moment awareness rather than a distraction from it. I noticed exactly where in my body the discomfort was located, what kind of sensation it was, how it changed from moment to moment. This intense focus on immediate physical reality actually sharpened my attention to the strategic discussions, rather than detracting from them. This practice extended beyond my chronic condition to acute injuries and illnesses that arose during military campaigns. When I injured my shoulder in a riding accident, instead of spending mental energy lamenting the inconvenience or worrying about how it would affect my fighting ability, I used the injury as an opportunity to practice present moment acceptance. The shoulder hurt, but I was still alive, still capable of leadership, still able to fulfill my duties, just with some additional physical sensation to accommodate. I also observed how pain could serve as a teacher about the temporary nature of all experiences. Physical discomfort arises, peaks, changes, and eventually passes away. When you pay close attention to this process, you start to notice that thoughts and emotions follow similar patterns. Anxiety arises, intensifies, and fades. Anger emerges, dominates your attention briefly, then dissolves. This recognition of impermanence, first learned through working skillfully with physical pain, became applicable to all the challenges of leadership and life. The practice of present moment awareness with pain also taught me about the difference between necessary suffering and optional suffering. The physical sensation of pain is necessary when it arises, simply what's happening in your body. But the mental anguish we add through resistance, self-pity, or catastrophic thinking about what the pain might mean is optional. We can choose to experience pain without suffering about the pain. Perhaps most importantly, learning to remain present with physical discomfort built my capacity to stay grounded during emotional and psychological challenges. When facing criticism, betrayal, or failure, I could apply the same principles, acknowledge the unpleasant experience fully, resist the urge to escape into mental elaborations, and find the space of awareness that could hold the difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. The body, with all its limitations and vulnerabilities, became one of my most reliable allies in developing present moment awareness. Unlike the mind, which can wander anywhere in time and space, the body is always here, always now. Physical sensation, pleasant or unpleasant, is always an available anchor for present moment attention, a doorway back to immediate reality when the mind has gotten lost in abstractions or projections. Virtue is not an abstract ideal to be contemplated, is a living practice that can only be expressed in the present moment. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every action you take is an opportunity to embody wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance. These four cardinal virtues became my daily companions, not as lofty concepts, but as practical guides for navigating each moment with integrity and purpose. The practice of virtue requires exquisite present moment awareness because ethical choices always happen in the now. You cannot be virtuous in the past, that time is gone. You cannot be virtuous in the future, that time may never come. The only place where character is actually built and demonstrated is in this moment, in this choice, in this specific situation that demands your response. I remember a day when a messenger brought news that one of my trusted governors had been embezzling funds meant for military supplies. My immediate impulse was anger and a desire for swift, harsh punishment that would send a message to other potential wrongdoers. But instead of acting on this initial reaction, I paused to consider what virtue actually required in this situation. Wisdom demanded that I gather complete information before making judgments. Justice required that the punishment fit the crime and serve the greater good. Courage meant facing the political consequences of whatever decision I made, rather than choosing the path of least resistance. Temperance called for proportional response, without excessive emotion driving my choices. When I brought present moment awareness to these considerations, a more nuanced approach emerged. The governor had indeed stolen funds, but investigation revealed that he had done so to pay for medical treatment for his dying wife, not for personal luxury. Justice in this case required accountability, but also recognition of the desperate circumstances that had led to his poor choice. We recovered the funds, removed him from his position, but also ensured that his family's medical needs were met through legitimate channels. This situation taught me that virtue is rarely about following rigid rules, but about bringing the highest qualities of human character to bear on each unique situation. Present moment awareness is essential because it allows you to see what this specific moment actually requires, rather than applying predetermined formulas that might not fit the current circumstances. The practice of courage became particularly important during times when popular opinion or political pressure pushed me toward expedient choices rather than right ones. During the plague years, there was enormous pressure to blame and persecute foreign communities for bringing disease to Rome. The easy political choice would have been to scapegoat outsiders to satisfy public anger and fear. But present moment courage meant facing the reality that the plague was a natural phenomenon, not a conspiracy, and that persecuting innocent people would only add injustice to an already tragic situation. Standing against popular prejudice required the kind of courage that can only be summoned in the moment when you're actually facing the pressure to compromise your principles. Temperance proved equally challenging in a position where almost unlimited indulgence was available. As emperor, I could have satisfied any material desire, pursued any pleasure, or used my power for personal advantage. But temperance in the present moment meant asking, with each choice, will this serve my highest good and the good of those I lead, or is this just ego and appetite seeking satisfaction? This daily practice of temperate choice extended to simple matters like food and drink, as well as more complex issues like how to use imperial resources. Every meal was an opportunity to practice moderation. Every decision about palace expenditures was a chance to choose necessity over luxury. These small acts of temperance in daily life built the strength needed for larger acts of self-restraint when major temptations arose. Wisdom, perhaps the most complex virtue, required constant present moment learning and the humility to recognize the limits of my understanding. In every council meeting, every conversation with advisors, every interaction with citizens, I tried to remain open to new information and different perspectives, rather than assuming I already knew the best course of action. Justice demanded that I consider not just immediate consequences, but the precedent each decision would set for future leaders and the impact on all members of society, not just those with political influence. This often meant making unpopular choices that served long-term fairness over short-term political advantage. The beautiful paradox I discovered is that virtue is both the means and the end of present moment living. You need present moment awareness to practice virtue skillfully, but practicing virtue also deepens your capacity for present moment awareness. Each ethical choice made consciously strengthens your ability to stay grounded in reality, rather than being swept away by emotions, pressures, or unconscious habits. Virtue transformed from a burden or obligation into a source of joy and strength. When you align your actions with your deepest values in each present moment, you experience the satisfaction of living with integrity regardless of external outcomes. This alignment creates an inner stability that no external circumstance can shake. Asterisk. The greatest gift you can offer another person is your complete presence. Not your advice, not your solutions, not even your agreement, but the full quality of your attention given freely and without reservation. I learned this lesson through both my failures and successes in the relationships that mattered most to me, and it transformed how I connected with everyone, from my beloved wife, Faustina, to the humblest servants in the imperial household. In my early years as emperor, I was often physically present with people while mentally absent. During conversations with Faustina about our children, household matters, or her personal concerns, part of my attention would be reviewing the day's political challenges or planning tomorrow's military strategies. I believed I was being efficient, managing multiple responsibilities simultaneously. But what I was actually doing was cheating the people I loved most of the connection they deserved and needed. The turning point came during a conversation with my son, Commodus, when he was struggling with the pressures of being an imperial heir. He was trying to tell me about his fears and uncertainties, but I was listening with divided attention while simultaneously composing a response to a diplomatic crisis. When he stopped mid-sentence and asked, "Father, are you really listening to me?" I realized that my distracted presence was not just ineffective, was actually damaging our relationship. That moment taught me that present moment. Attention is not just a personal spiritual practice, it's an act of love and respect that either strengthens or weakens every interaction you have with another person. When you give someone your complete presence, you communicate that they matter, that their experience has value, that they are worthy of your full engagement. When you offer distracted attention, you send the opposite message, regardless of your intentions. I began practicing what I called presence as service in all my relationships. When someone was speaking to me, I would bring my complete attention to their words, their tone of voice, their facial expressions, and the emotions underneath their communication. This didn't mean abandoning critical thinking or agreeing with everything they said, but it meant being fully available to understand their perspective and respond from genuine engagement rather than partial attention. The transformation in my relationships was remarkable. Faustina began sharing more openly with me because she felt truly heard rather than tolerated. My children became more willing to seek my guidance because they experienced me as genuinely interested in their lives rather than just available for formal instruction. Even my political relationships improved because senators and advisors felt respected and valued when I gave them my undivided attention during our interactions. Present moment. Listening also revealed layers of communication that I had been missing when my attention was scattered. People communicate not just with words, but with energy, emotion, and subtext. When you listen with complete presence, you can hear not just what someone is saying, but what they're not saying, what they're afraid to say, and what they most need to be understood about their experience during a particularly difficult period. In my marriage, when political pressures and military campaigns had created distance between Faustina and me, I realized that our conversations had become superficial exchanges of information rather than genuine connection. We would discuss schedules, responsibilities, and practical matters, but we had lost the deeper intimacy that had characterized our early relationship. I began setting aside time each day for what I called presence conversations with Faustina, when we would sit together without any agenda except to connect authentically. I would ask her about her inner experience, her dreams, her fears, and her joys, and then listen with the same quality of attention I brought to important state matters. These conversations revitalized our relationship and reminded us both of why we had chosen to share our lives together. The practice of present moment attention also taught me about the difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. When you're listening to respond, you're primarily focused on what you're going to say next, how you're going to solve the other person's problem, or how you're going to defend your own position. This kind of listening is actually a form of waiting to talk rather than genuine engagement with another person's experience. When you're listening to understand, you're genuinely curious about the other person's perspective, feelings, and needs. You're not preparing your response while they're speaking because you're too interested in what they're actually communicating to think ahead to your reply. This quality of listening often reveals solutions and possibilities that wouldn't be visible if you were focused primarily on having the right answer ready. I also discovered that present moment attention has healing power in relationships. When someone feels truly seen and heard, old wounds begin to heal, defensive patterns soften, and deeper connection becomes possible. Some of my most meaningful interactions as emperor came not from giving advice or making decisions, but from simply being fully present with someone who needed to feel understood. This practice extends beyond intimate relationships to every human interaction: the servant who brings your morning meal, the guard who opens doors, the messenger who delivers correspondence to person deserves the dignity of your present moment attention. However brief the interaction, these moments of genuine presence create a web of human connection that transforms the quality of daily life for everyone involved. Asterisk gratitude is perhaps the most powerful antidote to mental time travel that I ever discovered. When you genuinely appreciate what is present in your life right now, your mind naturally stops wandering into regrets about the past or anxieties about the future. But gratitude is not merely a positive emotion. To cultivate it is a way of seeing that reveals the abundance that exists in every moment, even the most challenging ones. Early in my reign, gratitude felt almost impossible during the worst periods of the plague. How could I be grateful when thousands were dying daily? How could I appreciate anything when the empire was suffering under such devastating circumstances? I thought gratitude meant pretending that terrible things weren't happening, or forcing myself to feel happy when sadness and concern were the appropriate responses to reality. But I learned to distinguish between gratitude and denial. Gratitude doesn't require you to be thankful for suffering, injustice, or loss. It means finding elements within any situation, no matter how difficult, that genuinely deserve appreciation. Even in the darkest times, there were always threads of goodness, beauty, and meaning that could be acknowledged without diminishing the reality of what was painful. During the plague years, I began each day by identifying 3 specific things in my immediate experience that warranted genuine appreciation. Sometimes these were significant: the loyalty of soldiers who continued serving despite personal risk, the courage of physicians who cared for the sick, the resilience of communities that supported their most vulnerable members. But often they were simple: the taste of clean water, the warmth of sunlight on my face, the fact that I had awakened to another day of life and consciousness. This practice taught me that gratitude is not dependent on circumstances being perfect. It is a choice to notice and appreciate the elements of goodness that exist within whatever circumstances you face. When you train your attention to look for what deserves appreciation, you discover that every moment contains some mixture of challenge and gift, difficulty and grace. I remember a particularly cold winter during the Germanic campaigns when supplies were low, morale was poor, and military progress had stalled. The easy focus would have been on everything that was going wrong: the harsh weather, the slow pace of advancement, the stress on my soldiers. But I chose to practice gratitude as a form of present moment awareness, looking for what was genuinely worthy of appreciation in our situation. I found myself grateful for the ingenuity of soldiers who created warmth and comfort in harsh conditions, for the deep bonds of friendship that emerged under pressure, for my own health and strength that allowed me to share these hardships rather than observing them from comfortable distance. This gratitude didn't eliminate the challenges we faced, but it provided a foundation of appreciation that made those challenges more bearable and our responses more creative. The practice of present moment gratitude also revealed how much beauty and wonder exists in ordinary experiences that we usually take for granted. When you bring conscious appreciation to routine activities, they become opportunities for joy rather than mere obligations to complete. Eating becomes a celebration of nourishment and flavor. Walking becomes an appreciation of your body's capacity for movement. Conversation becomes gratitude for the miracle of human connection and communication. I began noticing details of daily life that I had previously overlooked: the skill of craftsmen who created the objects I used, the dedication of servants who maintained the palace, the natural beauty that surrounded us even in urban Rome. This attention to the present moment gifts that were constantly available transformed my experience, from one of burden-bearing to one of wonder at the richness of life. Gratitude also became a tool for working with difficult emotions and challenging relationships. When I felt frustrated with a particular senator's obstructive behavior, I would look for aspects of his character or service that I could genuinely appreciate. This didn't mean ignoring his problematic actions, but it meant seeing him as a complete human being rather than just an obstacle to my agenda. Often, this shift in perspective opened possibilities for more skillful interaction. Perhaps most importantly, gratitude trained my mind to recognize abundance rather than focusing on scarcity. Instead of dwelling on what was missing, lacking, or imperfect in any situation, I learned to notice what was present, available, and functional. This shift from scarcity thinking to abundance awareness changed not only my emotional state, but also my capacity to find creative solutions to problems. The practice taught me that gratitude is both a cause and effect of present moment awareness. When you're truly present, you naturally notice things that deserve appreciation because you're paying attention to what is actually here, rather than being distracted by what is absent. And when you cultivate gratitude, you're drawn into present moment awareness because genuine appreciation can only happen in the now. I discovered that gratitude is contagious in the best possible way. When you genuinely appreciate people and circumstances, others feel that appreciation and often respond with greater generosity, creativity, and cooperation. A culture of gratitude emerged in my inner circle that made even difficult work more enjoyable and collaborative relationships more productive. The ultimate insight is that gratitude transforms your relationship with time itself. Instead of seeing the present moment as something to get through on your way to a better future, you begin to experience each moment as containing its own intrinsic value and beauty. This doesn't make you complacent or eliminate the motivation to improve circumstances, but it provides a foundation of contentment that makes all your efforts more effective and sustainable. Each evening, after the demands of leadership had ended and the palace had grown quiet, I would engage in what became one of my most valuable practices, a thorough but non-judgmental review of the day's events. This evening reflection was not an exercise in self-criticism or regret, but a way of extracting wisdom from experience without becoming trapped in mental time travel about what had already passed. The key distinction I learned was between reflection and rumination. Rumination is the mind's tendency to replay events obsessively, usually focusing on what went wrong, what we should have done differently, or how we were wronged by others. This kind of mental repetition creates suffering without producing insight and keeps us psychologically trapped in a past that cannot be changed. Reflection, by contrast, is a conscious and purposeful examination of experience designed to extract learning and prepare for more skillful future action. Reflection asks, what did I learn today? How did I grow? What patterns do I notice in my responses? How can I apply this wisdom going forward? This process honors the past as a teacher while keeping you anchored in present moment. Wisdom, my evening review, followed a consistent structure that I developed over years of practice. I would begin by simply recalling the major events of the day without immediate judgment meetings attended, decisions made, conversations held, challenges faced. This initial review was like creating an objective chronicle of what had actually occurred, separate from my emotional reactions to those events. Next, I would examine my internal responses to the day's situations. Where had I responded from wisdom and where had I reacted from emotion? When had I been fully present and when had my mind been elsewhere? Which interactions had I handled skillfully and which had revealed areas where I needed growth? This was conducted with the curiosity of a natural philosopher studying an interesting phenomenon, not with the harshness of a judge condemning a criminal. I particularly focused on moments when I had been triggered into anger, fear, or other strong emotions. Rather than criticizing myself for having these responses, I would examine what had caused them and what they revealed about areas where I still needed to develop greater equanimity. A senator's criticism that provoked defensive anger might reveal my attachment to approval. A military setback that triggered anxiety might show my need to develop deeper trust in uncertainty. One evening stands out in my memory particularly clearly. I had lost my temper during a council meeting when several advisors questioned a strategic decision I had made. My anger had silenced the discussion and prevented us from exploring potentially valuable alternatives to my approach. During my evening reflection, I could see that my emotional reaction had come from feeling that my competence was being questioned rather than recognizing that their concerns came from genuine desire to serve the empire's interests. This insight allowed me to return to those advisors the next day with an apology for my harsh response and an invitation to continue the discussion I had shut down. The resulting conversation not only improved our military strategy, but also strengthened the trust and openness within my advisory council. None of this learning would have been possible if I had spent the evening ruminating about how unreasonable my advisors had been, rather than examining my own contribution to the conflict. The evening review also included acknowledgement of what had gone well during the day. I would identify moments when I had acted from my highest values, times when I had been fully present, and situations where I had responded with wisdom rather than reactivity. This appreciation wasn't self-congratulation, but recognition of the capacity for skillful action that existed within me and could be cultivated further. I found it particularly valuable to notice small victories alongside major accomplishments. A moment of patience with a difficult servant deserved the same recognition as a successful diplomatic negotiation, because both represented the practice of virtue in daily life. These acknowledgments built confidence in my ability to grow and change, which made it easier to face areas where improvement was needed. Perhaps most importantly, the evening review always concluded with a conscious release of the day. After extracting whatever learning was available, I would formally let go of everything that had occurred, returning my attention to the present moment and preparing for restful sleep. This release was essential because even positive reflection can become a form of mental time travel if you continue dwelling on past events instead of applying the insights to present moment living. I developed a simple ritual for this release. I would imagine placing all the day's events, both challenging and successful, into the hands of the larger cosmos that had given me the opportunity to experience them. This wasn't abdication of responsibility, but recognition that each day was complete, and that tomorrow would bring new opportunities to apply whatever wisdom I had gained. The evening review taught me that the past becomes a teacher rather than a prison when you approach it with the right intention and methodology. Every experience, no matter how difficult or seemingly unsuccessful, contains seeds of wisdom that can inform future choices. But this wisdom is only accessible when you examine experience from present moment awareness rather than from regret, resentment, or wishful thinking about how things could have been different. Over time, this practice created a sense of continuous learning and growth that made each day feel valuable regardless of external outcomes. Whether the day had been filled with victories or defeats, smooth sailing or difficult challenges, it had provided opportunities for development that could only be recognized through thoughtful reflection, guided by present moment wisdom. The true test of any wisdom is whether you can share it effectively with others, and teaching present moment awareness to my son Commodus and other young leaders in my circle became one of my most challenging and rewarding responsibilities. I discovered that you cannot simply lecture people into presence, you must model it consistently and create opportunities for them to discover its value through their own experience. Commodus was particularly resistant to what he saw as philosophical abstractions that had little relevance to the practical demands of leadership. Like many young people, he was eager for action and impatient with what seemed like passive contemplation. "Father," he would say, "I don't need to meditate about decisions, I need to make them. I don't need to be present to problems, I need to solve them." His resistance taught me that teaching present moment living requires meeting people where they are, rather than where you think they should be. Instead of beginning with formal meditation practices or abstract philosophical concepts, I started showing Commodus how present moment awareness could make him more effective at activities he already cared about: military training, political strategy, and social interaction. During sword practice, I would guide his attention to the immediate feedback his body was giving him about balance, timing, and coordination. When he was fully present to these physical sensations, his performance improved dramatically. When his mind wandered to other concerns, or he became frustrated with mistakes, his technique suffered. This tangible connection between presence and effectiveness began to convince him that these practices had practical value. I applied the same approach to his political education. Instead of discussing abstract principles of justice, I would ask him to practice complete attention during conversations with senators, citizens, and advisors. Notice not just their words, I would suggest, but their tone, their energy, what they're not saying. See what you discover when you listen with your whole being, rather than just waiting for your turn to speak. The transformation in his interactions was remarkable. When Commodus brought full presence to conversations, people responded with greater openness and trust. His natural charisma was amplified when it was backed by genuine attention and interest in others. These experiences taught him more about the power of presence than any theoretical explanation could have accomplished. I also taught through modeling rather than just instruction. During public ceremonies, private meetings, and family interactions, I tried to demonstrate the qualities I was encouraging in others: calm attention, thoughtful responses rather than reactive emotions, genuine interest in others' perspectives, and graceful acceptance of whatever circumstances arose. One of my most effective teaching tools was what I called presence partnerships with younger advisors and officials. I would pair them with more experienced leaders who had developed strong present moment awareness, asking them to observe and learn from these models, while also practicing the skills themselves in low-stakes situations. Marcus Aurelius, a young senator with great potential but a tendency toward anxious overthinking, was paired with Antonius Pius, one of my most centered advisors. Antonius taught Marcus to pause before speaking in Senate sessions, to breathe consciously when he felt overwhelmed by complex debates, and to focus completely on one topic at a time, rather than letting his mind race ahead to future concerns. The mentorship worked both ways. Marcus's enthusiasm and fresh perspectives energized Antonius, while Antonius's steady presence and practical wisdom gave Marcus a foundation for developing his own capacity for conscious leadership. These partnerships created a culture of present moment awareness that spread naturally throughout my administration. I learned that teaching presence requires great patience because people must discover its benefits through their own experience, rather than accepting it on faith. You cannot convince someone to be present through argument. You can only create conditions where the value of presence becomes obvious through practice and results. Sometimes, this meant allowing people to learn from the consequences of scattered attention and reactive behavior. When young leaders would make poor decisions because they were distracted by past failures or future anxieties, I would help them examine what had happened without judgment, guiding them to see the connection between their mental state and their choices. I also discovered that teaching presence is most effective when it's integrated into activities people are already engaged in rather than presented as an additional burden or separate practice. Instead of asking busy leaders to add meditation time to their schedules, I would show them how to bring meditative attention to activities they were already doing: walking between meetings, eating meals, reviewing documents, or listening to reports. The ripple effects of this teaching were profound. As more people in my circle developed present moment awareness, the quality of our collective decision-making improved dramatically. Meetings became more focused and productive. Conflicts were resolved more skillfully. Creative solutions emerged more frequently because people were fully engaged rather than mentally elsewhere. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that the best teaching happens through creating a safe environment where people can experiment with new ways of being without fear of judgment or failure. When someone tried to practice presence but fell back into old patterns of reactivity or distraction, I would acknowledge their effort while gently pointing out what they might try differently next time. Teaching others also deepened my own practice, because explaining these concepts required me to understand them more clearly and embody them more consistently. You cannot teach what you do not practice, and you cannot practice authentically if you're trying to appear perfect rather than continuing to learn and grow. The greatest satisfaction came from watching people discover their own capacity for presence, and witnessing how this discovery transformed not only their effectiveness as leaders, but also their joy in daily life. When someone learns to live in the present moment, they don't just become better at their work, they become more alive, more connected, and more capable of finding meaning and fulfillment in whatever circumstances they face. Asterisk, as I prepare to pass from this life to whatever comes next, I want to leave you with the most practical wisdom I have gained about living fully in the present moment. You may not rule a physical empire as I have, but each of you governs the empire of your own consciousness, and the principles that have served me in leading millions can serve you in leading the most important life of all your own. The empire of the present moment is the only territory over which you have true sovereignty. External circumstances will always remain partially beyond your control: other people's actions, economic conditions, natural disasters, political changes, even your own health and aging. But your attention, your responses, your character, and your capacity for presence remain under your dominion in each moment, regardless of what that moment contains. Begin building your present moment empire with the same systematic approach. I used to govern Rome. Start each day with a period of conscious preparation, of 5 minutes of focused attention to your breath, your intentions, and your current reality. This is not time stolen from productivity, but investment in the quality of awareness that will determine how effectively you engage with everything that follows. Develop the discipline of returning to the present moment whenever you notice your mind has wandered into past regrets or future anxieties. This is not a practice you master once, but a skill you strengthen through repetition, like physical exercise or musical training. Each time you catch yourself mentally time-traveling and consciously return to the now, you are building the capacity that will serve you in life's most challenging moments. Practice the art of single tasking, bringing complete attention to whatever you are doing rather than trying to manage multiple activities simultaneously. Whether you are eating, walking, working, or conversing, experiment with giving that activity your full presence. You will discover that this focused attention not only makes you more effective, but also reveals depths of satisfaction and meaning. In ordinary experiences, learn to distinguish between what you can control and what you cannot, and invest your energy accordingly. You cannot control other people's choices, but you can control your responses. You cannot control outcomes, but you can control the quality of effort you bring to your actions. You cannot control how long you will live, but you can control how fully you live in each moment you are given. Cultivate the discipline of perception by questioning your interpretations of events. When something triggers strong emotion, pause and ask, what are the facts of this situation, separate from my stories about what these facts mean? This practice will free you from countless forms of unnecessary suffering and help you respond to reality rather than your projections about reality. Build your own inner citadel, that place of unshakable peace that external circumstances cannot touch. This fortress is constructed through daily choices to respond rather than react, to accept what you cannot change while working skillfully to influence what you can, and to find meaning and purpose regardless of whether conditions are easy or difficult. Embrace difficulty as a teacher rather than an enemy. Every challenge you face is an opportunity to strengthen your capacity for present moment awareness. Physical pain, emotional discomfort, relationship conflicts, professional setbacks, all of these can become curriculum for developing greater wisdom, compassion, and inner strength if you meet them with conscious attention rather than unconscious resistance. Remember that death gives life its preciousness and urgency, not because you should live in fear of mortality, but because remembering life's brevity helps you focus on what truly matters. Each day, each hour, each moment is irreplaceable. This awareness will help you stop postponing joy, connection, and meaning while waiting for perfect conditions that may never arrive. Practice gratitude as a form of present moment awareness. In any situation, no matter how challenging, there are always elements that deserve genuine appreciation if you train your attention to notice them. This practice will transform your relationship with your own life from one of chronic dissatisfaction to one of wonder at the gift of consciousness itself. Create rituals for transition between activities that help you release the past and arrive fully in the present. This might be as simple as taking 3 conscious breaths before entering a meeting, pausing to feel your feet on the ground before walking into your home, or spending a moment setting intention before beginning any important task. Cultivate present moment relationships by giving people the gift of your complete attention. Put away distractions when others are speaking to you. Listen not just to their words but to their emotions, needs, and the deeper communication underneath their surface message. This quality of presence is one of the most powerful ways to create connection and trust in any relationship. Remember that mastery of present moment living is not a destination but a journey. You will not achieve perfect presence and then maintain it effortlessly. Like physical fitness, conscious awareness requires ongoing attention and practice. Be patient with yourself as you develop these capacities, and celebrate small progress rather than demanding immediate perfection. The wisdom I have shared with you is not theory but lived experience, tested in the crucible of responsibility for millions of lives during some of history's most challenging times. These practices work not because they are easy, but because they are truth. They align you with the fundamental reality that the present moment is the only place where life actually occurs. Your life, like mine, will contain a mixture of joy and sorrow, success and failure, ease and difficulty. But if you learn to meet each moment with full presence, conscious choice, and acceptance of what you cannot control, you will discover that every experience contains opportunities for growth, wisdom, and connection. This is the ultimate empire, dominion over others, but sovereignty over your own consciousness. Exercised moment by moment in the eternal now, rule your present moment empire well, and you will live a life worthy of your highest potential. Regardless of external circumstances, this is my final gift to you. The knowledge that the power to live fully has always been and will always be in your hands, available in this moment and every moment that follows.